I've always wanted to share my opinions on certain games with the greater public, the games I grew up with, the games that shaped my childhood, the games that kept me a virgin while I was in high school. These are the kind of games I want to talk about on this channel, and if we're talking important games, then you already know that we're talking Dark Souls games. And I figured, what better game from that series to talk about first than the one that generates the most controversy, that being Dark Souls 2. I've played both versions of 2. I started with the vanilla version back on the PS3, and later on I decided to upgrade to the Scholar version on the PS4. Interestingly enough, Dark Souls 2 was actually the first Souls game I ever officially owned, although technically not the first one I ever completed. I played about halfway through before I got my hands on the first game, and then I decided I should start over so I could play the series in order. This is obviously ignoring Demon Souls in that lineup, but I didn't know Demon Souls existed at the time, so whoops. So basically, I quit my Dark Souls 2 playthrough, I finished the first game instead, and then I went back to 2 and I finished that playthrough as well. Ultimately at the time, I was really into both of the games, and I thought they were both really amazing, but even back then I definitely noticed that Dark Souls 2 wasn't quite as enjoyable as the first, at least not to me. For all the Dark Souls 2 fans out there, I'm sorry to say that this opinion has not changed in recent years. In fact, I was a much bigger fan of the game back in high school than I am now. It easily ranks as my least favorite game in the series, and today I thought it might be interesting to go over some of my issues with it. Now, something I see fairly often when Dark Souls 2 gets criticized on the internet is this idea that people that dislike 2 only do so because they played the other games first and can't accept that 2 is just different from 1, or they simply hate the game because it wasn't directed by Miyazaki. But just so everyone knows, this isn't the case for me. I mean, sure, there are definitely changes 2 made from the first games that I don't like, and we'll cover them when we get there. But I played 2 before I played 1, and I made it all the way to Drenlake Castle as well, so I'd argue I experienced a pretty substantial amount of 2's content and gameplay motifs before the other games could have any influence on me. Also, I didn't even know who Miyazaki was when I first played these games, let alone that he was the director for the first one but not the second, and it doesn't mean anything to me now either. I couldn't care less who's in charge of a game, the only concern I have is that the game is fun. Please keep in mind that despite how I might talk about 2 in this video, I don't hate the game. I enjoyed enough to play it after all. I just think it's subpar when compared to its siblings, especially the Scholar version, which is the one I'm going to be focusing on in this video. I'm not going to be going over every single detail about Dark Souls 2 in this particular video, because I'm not making this to be a retrospective or an in-depth analysis or anything along those lines. This video is very much just a personal issues rant kind of thing. I can't promise that I'll be able to point out every flaw with the game, but I'm going to do my best to point out all the major annoyances that I came across during some of my playthroughs. There's also a lot of aspects about Souls games that might be relevant to a review or a retrospective, but I'm not going to be covering them because, again, this isn't a review or a retrospective, but also, I'm not the kind of person you want covering these aspects of the game. You don't want me to be the person analyzing the quality of a Souls game's story, for example. I'd just fuck it up big time, and for that reason, I won't be discussing it. So basically, if some aspect of the game goes unnoticed, the reason is probably because I wouldn't be able to criticize it very well given my lack of critiquing skill on the subject. I'll be pointing out plenty of personal takes I have on the game, coupled with issues I've experienced when playing the game, so it's going to be a lot of my opinions mixed in with a couple objective criticisms, and overall it's just going to showcase why I rank this game beneath all the other Souls games. Please also remember that while some issues I bring up will be objective, like I said, a lot of this is just my personal thoughts on the game. At the end of the day, we've all got dog shit opinions on meaningless things, and this is just mine. So if you really hate every point that I make or completely disagree with something I say, feel free to smack that dislike and leave a fatty comment down below. Some of you may also notice that the majority of these complaints are already out there in far superior videos of much higher quality and caliber compared to mine, but none of them were made by yours truly, so fuck them. I'm gonna make this video anyways and pretend like those other ones don't exist, and you can all do the same along with me. With all of that being said, let's just fucking jump right into it. Dark Souls 2 is a different kind of beast from the other Souls games, and its changes can be felt immediately from the outset. One of these changes is to the movement. Now, Dark Souls 2 changes a couple of things about movement that I've noticed, but the most confusing change is that which was made to the character movement, which is represented through the left joystick. Dark Souls 2 for some reason doesn't have the same movement as the other games in the series, and it limits how much control over the character you have as you play. For anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, in all Dark Souls games except for 2, the left joystick allows you to change the character's direction at will, and any input on the controller will essentially be represented in-game. This isn't the case with Dark Souls 2 though, which feels like the left joystick is actually more akin to a D-pad if it had 8 directions instead of 4. The character in Dark Souls 2 seems to stay strictly aligned to essentially 8 directions in the world, and it's very difficult to make subtle changes to your direction of movement unless you adjust it by using the camera with the right joystick. Moving the left joystick in any direction isn't represented by the character on screen until you hit one of the 8 increments. The area in between is basically just dead space. This change is honestly just confusing more than anything. Mario 64 had fully represented movement through a joystick for Pete's sakes, and it's been in the Souls games since the original with Demon Souls. It comes across during gameplay as incredibly clunky, and it can be a really obnoxious variable to have to account for in general. Now you can change this on the PC release of the game if you fuck around with the files, but you can't do it on consoles, and it's just such a stupid limitation to have in the game in the first place. I mean, it was one thing to do it for the base version, but they had a re-release with Scholar of the First Sin. How did no one notice this issue, and why on earth wasn't it fixed in a patch or something? Why was it even included to begin with? It's not like this breaks the game or anything, by the way. You eventually get used to it as you play and learn to adapt by making precise movements with the camera instead of the left joystick, and in other areas you just learn to deal with the limited controls, but it's just confusing as to why they would design the game this way, and it's always really jarring whenever you play any of the other Souls games and return to Dark Souls 2. Aside from this movement issue, Dark Souls 2 also made rolling a lot more fluid as far as how it feels, and for some reason I'm not a fan of this change either. It's ironic because saying that the rolling is fluid now makes it sound like a compliment, honestly. The rolling is more realistic as opposed to Dark Souls 1's or 3's or Demon Souls' rolls, which were all really snappy, but honestly I really just prefer the snappy rolls. It's a lot more clear to the player how good your roll actually is, and I always just found the snappy feedback to be a lot more enjoyable during gameplay. But this is a very minor issue compared to the actual problem that's associated with rolling, which is the fact that rolling and iframes are no longer directly tied to one another in Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 has a new stat called adaptability, which is primarily responsible for raising the player's agility, and agility is directly responsible for how many iframes you have during a roll. In every other Souls game, iframes are intrinsically tied to rolling, and rolling is either buffed or nerfed based upon how much equipment you're using at any given time. But they changed this in Dark Souls 2. From what I understand, Demon Souls rolling was very simple. You either had under 50% equipment burden and you had a fast roll, or you had over 50% equipment burden and you had a fat roll. Dark Souls shifted this slightly so that 25% equipment burden and under was now fast rolling, 25 to 50% became a mid roll, and 50% and above became a fat roll. Fat rolling gives you the least amount of iframes and it makes recovering from the roll take a really long time. Fast rolling gives you the most iframes, and it makes ending lag from the roll very short. Medium rolling is obviously the middle ground between the two. The way that Dark Souls 2 and 3 works is now rolling is on a continuum more so than the tiers of the previous games. A fast roll and a medium roll are much harder to differentiate from each other because the change is very gradual as opposed to how Dark Souls and Demon Souls functioned. Heavier rolls cover less distance and have more ending lag than faster ones, but it's far more subtle than before. Dark Souls 3 has constant iframes across all fast and medium rolls. The only change is that the ending lag is worse if you have a heavier roll. The thing is that Dark Souls 2 doesn't have iframes that are tied to rolling. Iframes are now tied to adaptability and agility instead, which means a fast roll can be borderline useless, and a fat roll can be tremendous. It all depends upon how much stat investment you're willing to make. The lowest agility you can have in Dark Souls 2 is 85, which gives you only 5 iframes, or 4 less than even the fat roll from Dark Souls 1. This is a really pathetic amount of invincibility per roll, and because your rolling no longer gives you any indication of how many iframes you have, rolling feels incredibly inconsistent across the game, especially at the start. Enemies will often have lingering hitboxes that will trigger a hit on the player even after they roll out of the way because their tiny amount of iframes runs out before they can escape the hitbox, so you feel like you correctly dodged an attack, but still got punished for it. Even ignoring these situations, the timing needed to successfully dodge an attack with this little amount of iframes, it's just excessively punishing, and it makes the beginning of the game feel especially unfair towards the player. This is incredibly annoying whenever starting a new playthrough of Dark Souls 2 because I always feel forced into leveling adaptability before anything else just so that I have a functional and dependable role. I'm not saying you need ADP to beat the game or anything, it's certainly possible to play without it, but it just makes rolling feel so inconsistent, especially when compared to the other games in the series. I can't speak for anyone else, but I was never once confused by any of the other games when I got hit by an attack during a roll. I could always tell that my roll had either been too early or too late. With Dark Souls 2 though, the animation no longer correlates to the amount of iframes you have, and getting hit during an attack can just feel cheap, especially at the start of the game. And this is even if you understand what's going on behind the scenes. Considering I brought up hitboxes, we might as well tackle those as well, because Dark Souls 2 has some truly awful hitboxes, the likes of which I have never seen in any other Souls game. First, I guess we should discuss enemy hitboxes. There are a lot of times where an enemy will hit you even when you are clearly out of the way of an attack, with the worst examples having the player take damage from an attack even when they're behind an enemy who is attacking forwards. This is really bad, and it's completely unfair to the player because you can't predict that you're going to be hit by something that isn't actually physically hitting you. There are also instances where certain enemies will do an attack and for some reason it just doesn't register on the player, so even though you were obviously hit, you take no damage at all. But the more egregious hitbox failures that I notice when playing Dark Souls 2 are the player's hitboxes, or perhaps lack of hitboxes would be more accurate. Every single time I do a playthrough of Dark Souls 2, I always encounter multiple instances where my weapon will simply not hit enemies. The weapon will go through them, but it won't stagger them at all, and it does no damage. This is a constant in Dark Souls 2. It always happens at some point in a playthrough. I can't tell if it's an issue specifically with certain weapons or what precisely is causing this, but I have never noticed this before in any other Souls game. I've played literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours of all the Souls games, including Demons, and I could probably count on one hand how many times something like this has occurred in all of those other games combined. But in Dark Souls 2 specifically, it happens constantly. If you sit down and play this game for any significant amount of time, you will come across this issue. It's just incredibly annoying knowing that you did nothing wrong and the game just fucked up on you, which can easily lead to you taking unnecessary damage or dying from an enemy that would have died themselves, or at least would have been stunned otherwise had your weapon not phased through them. The absolute worst instance that this can occur is when you're dealing with multiple enemies at once and you whiff an attack on someone, which leads to you getting comboed to death, and that makes for a great transition to talk about enemy spam in this game, because there is a lot of enemy spam in this game, and it becomes really annoying after a while. There are so many instances of Dark Souls 2 simply throwing enemies at the player for no other reason than seemingly to increase the difficulty of any given part of the game. The worst ways in which the game will do this is when it sets up a scenario in which the player unintentionally triggers something in the world that leads to multiple enemies ambushing the player at once. There are a ton of examples of this happening, and I'd like to list a few of the worst. For starters, there's the circular arena on the way to the shaded woods that has the player pull a lever that triggers 6 enemies to pop out of hiding and swarm you as the only exit is sealed off, so you have no choice but to fight through the spam. The lever was pulled in the first place to open up a door that allows you to progress, but the door takes ages just to open, and just as a final fuck you to the player, directly standing behind the door that opens up is a basilisk that blocks you from running to safety. Over in No Man's Wharf, there's 2 houses you walk past at the start of the level, which triggers several enemies playing dead on the floor and hiding in the houses to suddenly spring into action and all aggro the player at once. Moving over to Brightstone Cell Door, you get the route on the way to the Prowling Magus and Congregation boss fight where you open a chest that alerts all the nearby spiders to come out of hiding and immediately gank the player. Further past that, on the way to the Duke's Dear Freya fight, you'll enter a large building with a huge swarm of spiders that drop on you as you try to open the door to the left that lets you get to the boss fog, and also along the path to the Freya fight is the hidden bonfire behind the locked door, which once you finish resting at, will always swarm you with like 5 or 6 spiders. Changing locations now, right at the start of the game, is the Forest of Fallen Giants, where you have two of these types of encounters waiting for you. The first is the large sword the player can climb up to reach an item, which triggers 4 enemies to drop behind you that attempt to pin you along the narrow platform, and the second one is the 5 enemies that trigger along the route to the White Soapstone, where again, you're locked in a confined area because the door that you entered through is gated off Legend of Zelda style, and you're forced to fight the 5 enemies. Changing locations again, over in Sinner's Rise, after making it down past the elevator, you can pull a lever that opens up a gate, allowing you to make it to the boss fog, but it also triggers 4 hidden exploding enemies to rush you. And even if you check the rooms that the enemies are in, you could still miss them because looking in the rooms suggests that they're empty. The majority of these enemies are sitting beneath the water texture in a way that hides them from view. The area right before Sinner's Rise is the Lost Bastille, which has a door that leads to the Ruined Sentinels boss fight that once opened immediately triggers 5 enemies that were out of sight to suddenly rush you down. There's no way to anticipate this ahead of time, unless if you've seen the encounter beforehand, and even knowing it's coming is basically useless information because the enemies can't be taken care of from a distance or anything since they're protected by the building. You just have to aggro them and then take out 5 of the same enemy at the same time. Potentially the worst example of this ambush technique is also in the Lost Bastille, where you have to fight a pursuer, have to deal with 4 archers and at least 4 dogs on the ground all at the same time. Now to be fair, 3 of the archers can be killed ahead of time if you have a bow and some arrows, but not everyone will. Some of the dogs can be killed ahead of time as well if you have firebombs or ranged attacks to wipe them out, but not everyone has these means of attacking. And even if you do, you can only take out 2 of the dogs. The other ones are all hidden away in safe locations where you can't reach them before starting the pursuer fight. The motif, once again, is the ambush strategy that feels entirely unfair to new players, and even for returning ones like myself, it's just really annoying to have to deal with. The pursuer doesn't even spawn until you're at the bottom of the area, and most people wouldn't anticipate a bunch of hidden and ranged enemies to suddenly spring into action once you reach this specific location. Every one of these examples is a trap set up by the developers intending to catch players off guard, and it just feels cheap most of the time. I'm not saying that Dark Souls 2 is the only Souls game to have these types of encounters. I'm sure every game in the series has this type of setup at least once, but it never felt so commonplace before in those other games. Dark Souls 2 has an over-reliance on this type of enemy setup, and by the end of the game, it doesn't just feel cheap, it starts to feel lazy too. Although I would definitely consider these quote-unquote spam bushes, shout out to Mauler, to be the worst examples of spam in the game, an overabundance of enemies in general in certain locations is an issue as well. The 2 worst spam areas I can think of off the top of my head would be the Shrine of Amana and the Iron Keep. In Iron Keep, there were 14 Elan Knights I had to fight on the way to the Smelter Demon, and that isn't including the 2 Elan Knight captains you fight along the way, along with the reoccurring NPC invasion, so 17 enemies just to get to the boss, which is a massive waste of time if you ask me. I mean, I can beat 1 Elan Knight, so I can beat 14 Elan Knights. I don't understand why they threw in so many. Over in the Shrine, meanwhile, you have a huge number of casters who all have homing spell attacks that come towards the player very slowly and track your movement to a large degree. Now, because they're so slow, it sounds like it's not a huge deal, but most of the level is underwater, meaning the player's movement is significantly nerfed, and you can have several of these enemies casting at you at any given moment. This is an incredibly difficult area to deal with if you don't have some kind of ranged magic or arrows or something that you can use to take these enemies out from a distance. And even if you do have the means of taking them out from afar, it's just an incredibly annoying area to deal with regardless. Another example of an area with too much spam would probably be Black Gulch. It's a pretty short area, all things considered, and yet it's absolutely littered with enemies that spawn in from these black puddles that will pursue you to no end, along with an incredibly annoying NPC invader who shows up practically every single time you play through the area, regardless of whether or not you're hollowed or if you've killed him previously. This isn't even mentioning the way in which the area is littered with poison-spitting statues that stagger you whenever you're hit, leaving you completely open to enemy attacks. These areas are so obnoxious, especially the Gutter and Shrine of Amana, where the level design is screwing you over almost as much as the spam is. Constantly being staggered and poisoned is obnoxious when you're already dealing with a fuck ton of enemies. It's the same when your movement is constantly being hindered as the game throws multiple encounters at you. Now, considering I've brought up these environmental hazards, such as the water and Shrine of Amana, would anyone like to take a guess as to another way in which Dark Souls 2 completely screws the player over? Well, if you guessed the way in which certain aspects of the game limit the player but not the enemies, you would be correct. Take the Shrine of Amana, for example. Why is it that these knights aren't hindered at all by the water, but I am? It makes no sense. They just have an advantage over me in this scenario for no reason. It wouldn't be as bad if they weren't humanoid enemies, so I could assume they were just more adept to move in this kind of setting, kind of like the gremlin fucks in the level, or the ogre that you fought previously. But these guys are humans, just like me, and I'm stuck wading through the water at an obnoxious rate while these cunts are fucking speed racing their way over to me. It's like if you're so excited to see me, you might as well suck my fucking nuts before you kill me. Another hazard the enemies are hardly affected by is fall damage. Firstly, fall damage was buffed to fuck and back, and you can take an obtuse amount of damage from seemingly inconsequential distances. They probably did this because of the drop in Majula down to the gutter that requires the cat ring, but surely they didn't need to buff fall damage this heavily everywhere in the game to achieve this, right? Look at this fall damage in the Forest of Fallen Giants. Did that really warrant that much of a health deduction? And now check out how much the enemy takes from the same distance. It's fucking nothing. Why do they not take fall damage the same as the character? It's fucking stupid. If it does that little to the enemy, why does it do so much to me? This probably wouldn't be as big of an issue for me if fall damage wasn't so grossly overpowered compared to the other games in the series, but it is grossly overpowered. So I'm just wondering why the hell this wasn't balanced more. Weapon tracking is another way that the enemies aren't limited in the same way that the player character is. Dark Souls 2's enemy tracking can be absolutely fucking ridiculous. Some of these enemies will spin so fucking hard just to hit you, and it kinda looks absurd when you're playing. The turtle dudes are guilty of this, the spear dudes in the forest are guilty of this, and anything that does a jump attack is guilty of it. I mean, look at that fucking jump attack. Is that how physics works? I mean, I failed that class in high school. I got like a fucking 1 on my AP test, but even I'm smart enough to know that that shit shouldn't be physically possible. Now compare this to the player's ability to attack and shift their swings. Several weapons in Dark Souls 2 have extremely limited range of motion after they've been swung once in any given direction. I went back to check this in Dark Souls 1, and I found that practically every weapon from every weapon class is able to change its swing direction up to 180 degrees even after an initial swing. Maybe Dark Souls 2 is more realistic with its limited weapon range, but it's once again an area where the game is limiting the player's control, and this has never been a limitation before in Souls games. Demon Souls doesn't do this, Dark Souls 1 doesn't do this, and Dark Souls 3 doesn't do this. And I'm pretty sure Sekiro and Bloodborne don't do it either. I mean, play the games and fact check me. I promise you practically every weapon is able to do 180 degree turns to give the player full control of their attacks. It's just kind of ironic that the game with some of the worst spam and multiple enemy encounters also has the most punishing and limited range of motion when it comes to weapon movesets. Now, to be fair, not every weapon's moveset is awful, specifically the clubs, the axes, the great axes. For some reason, these classes are pretty good about giving the player a lot of control, although it's still not truly 180 degrees of functionality. I'd say it's more like between 160 and 170 degrees, so you can almost turn around completely during attacking combos. But why is this limited to only these classes? Dagger class weapons are light as fuck and extremely easy to use in theory, yet the character for some reason can hardly change the direction of their attacks while using them. It doesn't make any fucking sense, and it's just a stupid limitation that the player is forced to deal with during gameplay. Getting back to enemy tracking, by the way, the annoyances aren't only limited to swords and regular weapons. Take projectiles, for example. Certain bow enemies have this extremely obnoxious tracking system in place where the game is calculating your current direction of movement and predicting where you'll end up and aiming for that location instead of the location the player is in at any given moment. Basically what this means is that if you're walking forward, the enemy wouldn't aim for you, but instead will aim for where you will be in X amount of seconds so that the arrow will intercept your path of movement. The thing is, this system is extremely exploitable, and it just goes to show that this change from previous Souls games makes no sense. Take this archer on the stairs in the Forest of Fallen Giants, for example. I have played through this game several times, and this archer has never not shot his arrow directly into the ground in front of him, which makes no sense at all. The player is on a direct diagonal plane in front of him, with practically no room to avoid the arrow if he just shot it straight at you, but he never does. What the game is doing here is it's predicting your future location and aiming for that spot instead of where you are at the moment, but it's not accounting for the fact that you're moving up and forwards instead of just forwards. So it probably can't predict outside of an XY axis, because in this case, it's assuming you just continue to walk forward on that XY plane instead of realizing you're also going up on the Z plane, since it's a staircase in a 3D space. The interesting thing about archers in this game is that they don't all use this predicting the future technique to shoot at you, it's only some of them. Take the archers and things betwixt. They won't predict your movement, they just fire at the location you're at when the arrow leaves the bow. It's the same with enemies with a crossbow, but these guys in No Man's Wharf try to play the 300 IQ moves on your ass and do their predicting magic just like the cunts in the forest. I don't understand what the difference is or why some enemies behave differently, but it's just inconsistent. Some people might actually misconstrue this different predicting AI as a good thing for the game because it creates smarter enemies, but the thing is that it's not a smarter system, it's just a cheap one. And you can make the enemies do incredibly stupid things knowing how this works, since all you need to do to avoid an arrow is move in a direction as it fires and then just stop walking or turn around. My personal favorite technique I use to determine if the AI is predicting or normal is through my patent-pending Monty Swirly Whirly technique. These bad boys just can't keep up with my sick moves. I mean, honestly though, look at how this breaks them. Enemies will fire directly into the ground or at a random wall because they're only designed to predict where you would be, and they don't really seem to have any extra thought put into their attacks. And even if this worked perfectly, it's still a cheap way to design these enemies. Am I really supposed to believe these dogshit hollows are like master marksmen and can perfectly predict where I'm going to be based on my movements at any given time to nail their shot consistently? No, that's fucking stupid, and everybody knows it. Even fucking Michael knows that, and that guy's a fucking dumbass. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Michael. You know who you are. Another projectile that just functions completely arbitrarily are these firebombs. I have no clue how they function. Their aim seems completely random. The only constant is that the firebomb is thrown in the player's general direction, but even if you stand still in front of these guys and do literally nothing, they only have like a 50-50 chance of actually throwing it at you, and the other times their aim is just completely fucked. I have literally no clue as to why this happens. I assumed it was because the AI was trying to take into account the barrels that can explode behind you in this particular setup near the bonfire shortcut in the forest, but the firebomb dude near the stairs does the same thing, so I have to assume that it's just fucked across the game. The projectiles can even get saucy in the boss fights. During the Looking Glass night, he's got an electric attack that shoots out straight from his sword to attempt to hit the player, but if you're far enough away, the beam will harshly curve right at the end just to hit the player. I'm pretty sure this isn't supposed to happen. It really doesn't seem like the kind of move that's supposed to home in on the player. It honestly just kind of seems like another projectile with fucked tracking trying to screw the player over. Oh, and speaking of bosses...
Holy fuck, the bosses in this game are fucking dog shit.
Okay, so you fuckos remember how we were talking about spam earlier in the video? Yeah, it's not just a level design issue, it's a boss issue as well. Now, having multiple enemies in a boss fight isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, the gargoyles in Dark Souls 1 were great, so was ONS, and there are a myriad of Dark Souls 3 bosses that have multiple enemies to deal with that work great. And it's not like Dark Souls 2 doesn't have any decent multiple enemy boss fights. It has one. But a lot of the bosses in Dark Souls 2 don't use multiple enemy boss fights in interesting ways. It just throws a fuck ton of spam at you all at once to create a difficult encounter, and ultimately it just feels incredibly lazy, which is not something you want to feel during a boss fight. The bosses in this game can basically be grouped into one of three categories: spam, forgettable, or good. And also, there's actually technically a fourth category, which is the DLC, and I'm not including those right now because we're going to tackle the DLC sections separately, so ignore those for now. Let's go over the spam category first and see who falls within it. First up is the Skeleton Lords. They could have been a cool fight, but the three lords die in like 3 hits each, and the boss fight quickly devolves into just 1,000 generic skeleton enemies you have to cut through to beat the boss. This could have been like the Shadows of Yharnam fight from Bloodborne, because each lord kinda has their own thing going on. One seems inclined to cast magic, one seems melee focused, and one kinda doesn't both, But they didn't develop the boss based on their differing attack styles, they developed it based on the surprise spam that gets summoned after each of the lords die. This entire fight just devolves into wiping out a massive crowd of skeleton mobs, and it's boring as fuck. Second up is the Belfry Gargoyles, which were ripped straight from the first game and thrown into Dark Souls 2, except instead of fighting 2 this time, you have to kill 5, and you can have up to 3 attacking you at any given moment. I know it's based off the health bar somehow, but even still, this is so fucking lazy. I mean, even the fucking soundtrack is literally ripped exactly the same from Dark Souls 1. It's like the perfect analogy for all of Dark Souls 2. Take Dark Souls 1, try to copy it, and then throw in more enemies. There you go, it's the fucking Dark Souls 2 smoothie. Next up would be the Ruined Sentinels boss fight, and they're an okay fight, but they're honestly just really boring. I don't really have that much else to say about them, it's just the same guy except there's 3 of them at once. Honestly, I feel like they could have combined all these guys into one like Mega Sentinel and given him a more diverse moveset, and then maybe this would have been something worth keeping in the game, but as it is, it just feels, I don't know, lazy. After that, I guess, is the Royal Rat Vanguard. It's just a room of rats. The entire gimmick is you have to kill 10 before the actual boss shows up, and he dies in like 3 fucking hits, so it's just another stupid gank with the added fun of managing the Petrify status, which is a one-hit KO if they manage to build it up high enough on you. Royal Rat Authority is also a horrible boss fight, which is essentially determined right at the start. You either kill the 4 cunts and fight the big rat normally, which is basically a win, or you get toxic from the 4 cunts, and then you're basically fucked. There is no in-between. The gank is the only reason this fight offers any difficulty at all, and it'd still be more enjoyable to fight a snooze fest than a boss that makes you pray to Lorelei and RNGesus just to get past the first 30 seconds. Over in Brightstone Seldora, you have the Duke's Dear Freya fight, which is incredibly basic as well, and so in order to supplement the difficulty, they threw in like 10 fucking spiders you have to deal with. Just before that fight is the one with the Prowling Magus and Congregation, which is literally just a room full of generic enemies that were given a boss health bar, and finally rounding out the list are the 3 fights near Drenlake Castle. The Twin Dragon Riders are just a copy-paste of a fight you've already done earlier in the game, and it wasn't a particularly good fight either. The only difference this time around is that there's 2 of them. Again, kinda fucking lazy. The second encounter near Drenlake, which is actually down in the Throne of Want, is the fight with the Throne Defender and Watcher, who are clearly trying to do what Ornstein and Smo did, but the thing is, Ornstein and Smo was a far superior fight in terms of design. Ornstein was extremely nimble and was able to cover great distances quickly, and Smo was huge and lumbered around at a snail's pace. Separating the 2 was quite manageable as a result. And even better than just their general characteristics was that the developers placed multiple pillars in the arena that allowed you to block one while dealing with the other. The Defender and Watcher, on the other hand, feel incredibly similar in terms of designs and abilities. Watcher is slightly more aggressive and faster, and Defender is slightly more tanky and slower, but the arena is relatively small, all things considered. Their design doesn't really differentiate them from one another, so they're easily separated, and the arena offers nothing to assist you in separating them to safely attack one while the other is hindered. It really just feels like another reused concept of a Dark Souls 1 fight without understanding why that fight was so good to begin with. Oftentimes when you fight them together, it either takes an incredibly long time to safely attack one while they're both resting, or you just have to tank the damage from both of them and be aggressive because you don't want the fight to last for 10 minutes. And then finally you've got Dark Lurker. And I like Dark Lurker. He feels like an actually decent, thought-out multiple enemy fight. So, I guess 1 out of 10 ain't bad. So now on to the boring ones. I'm just gonna run through the list. I could describe them all in detail, but they're boring, so I don't think I will. You have the Last Cunt, the Flexile Cunt, the Lost Cunt, Scorpion-esque Cunt, Myth of the Baneful Cunt, Rotten Pussy Lips, Old Dragon Cunt, Covetous Cunt, Old Iron Cunt, Cunt Dragon, Demon a Cunt, Ven Dick, Dick Rider, Giant Dick, Ancient Dick, Nishan Dick, and then finally Aldia. There's just nothing that fucking interesting about any of these fights, at least not for me. None of them are particularly difficult, or fun for that matter, and some are again just blatantly taking concepts from Dark Souls 1 and reusing them. I mean, Nazca isn't horrible. I'm willing to forgive her as a concept ripoff. Dark Souls 1 did the same thing from Demon Souls with, like, the man-eaters to the gargoyles, and I'd say she's different enough from Quailag to feel more like an homage than a ripoff, but old Dragon Slayer is absolutely not getting off the hook. He is as blatant and lazy as the reused gargoyles fight, and he deserves to be eaten by the fucking dragon outside his fog wall. Finally, though, let's talk about some good fucking boss fights. First off is the Pursuer, and I really enjoy this fight. He overstays his welcome, but as a one-off boss fight, he's really fun, especially early game. I mean, I get his name is literally the Pursuer, so it makes sense that he would pursue you, but Jesus Christ, guys, you couldn't have given him like a different weapon for each subsequent fight? The cunt's got like 5 different weapons on his back, but he uses the same sword every time you fight him. Would have been nice to switch things up, that's all I'm saying. Next up is Executioner's Chariot. Honestly, I don't really know what to say about this guy. I'm not actually that big of a fan of the fight with the horse, but I think his gimmick is pretty cool, and I like his arena a lot, so I'm willing to give him a pass and put him up with the big boys. You've got the Looking Glass Knight, who's got a really atmospheric arena, and his fight is pretty solid, but the one complaint that I do have is the NPC summon that he does halfway through his fight. Keep that shit in your shield, cunt. I don't like dealing with you in a generic NPC. And if you manage to get an actual invader during this fight, you're basically just screwed. Next on the list is Smelter Demon, and I'm not gonna lie, I really like this fight. The run-up to him is awful, but this is like a really good fight, all things considered. I love how he constantly switches up his moveset. I think the passive damage thing that he deals really keeps you on your toes. I just think his attacks and stuff are really well made. This is easily my favorite base game fight. Towards the end of the game, you get the fight with Velstadt. He's pretty cool. I like his weapon. I like his buff once his health drops to half. And I like that he's got some new moves in that second phase as well. He isn't really that hard, but he hits hella hard, and that shit makes me hella hard, so he deserves to be on the list. And then the last good fight is Dark Lurker. I mean, I had to include him in the multiple enemies list too, but he definitely belongs here. He's a good fight. He's a hard fight. Makes me hard during the fight.
Excuse me, Mr. Spot. Isn't that the second time you've used that fucking joke?
Yep, and it's still as unfunny as the first time. Yeah, so I mean, that's the bosses. And just as a bit of a recap for the Alpha Sig members in the back, that brings the total number of enjoyable bosses in this game to 6. 6 good boss fights, that's it. 6. Maybe throw in old Dragon Slayer. He's a copy-paste, but I mean, it is a copy-paste of a better game, so I could allow it. So 7. 7 good fights. Out of 32. What's 7 divided by 32? Like fucking 22%. We've got a 22% good rating as far as bosses go in this game. I mean, fair enough. Like, you know, what does Abigail Mommy Milker's Shapiro's Brothers new movie have on Rotten Tomatoes right now? Like a 44%? The percentage of good bosses in this game scores lower than a fucking Ben Shapiro movie. If there's any Republicans who love Ben, don't fucking trip, guys. It's just a joke. Don't get it twisted. The only politics I like is politics with a Z. So yeah, one of the most important parts of any Souls game for me is the bosses, and they just do not stack up at all in Dark Souls 2 in my opinion. That's a pretty huge fucking damper on my mood whenever I feel like returning to this game. But you know another huge part of any Souls game that gets me excited to play? That's right, baby. It's that fucking world exploration. So, does Dark Souls 2 have any good world exploration? For starters, the world is linear as fuck, and that really takes me out of the game. See, I can already hear people tippity-tapping away at their keyboards talking about how Dark Souls is linear too, and so on and so forth, but let me explain exactly what I mean when I say the game is linear, because people like to conflate these two concepts I'm about to sling at you. Firstly, there's the argument that a game is linear in terms of its progression and in what order you're forced to accomplish goals the game tasks you with. Now, a lot of people who defend the game argue that Dark Souls 2 is extremely non-linear, because it affords the player a large amount of options, specifically in regards to world exploration and the order you have to defeat bosses in. This is only actually true in the first half of the game, but they're not wrong. In order to get to Drunlake Castle, which is your first goal essentially in the game, you have to kill the 4 Great Lords scattered around the world. You can choose any of the 4 Great Lords to fight in any order you want essentially, and there's even a secret 5th way to get to Drunlake Castle in which you just get a soul memory of 1 million or higher. You actually don't need to kill a single Great Lord if you're willing to stick out the grind. And yeah, that does offer a fair amount of freedom to the player, but this isn't the kind of linearity I'm talking about. Quite frankly, every Souls game would be considered non-linear in this regard, because every Souls game offers choices to the player to tackle certain challenges in whatever order they want. I'm talking about world design linearity, and Dark Souls 2's world design is so fucking linear, and that makes it so fucking boring. It's easily the most boring world out of any of the games that attempt an open world setup like this. Yes, that includes Dark Souls 3. 3's world is not good, but it's still better than 2's, and Demon's Souls isn't an open world game, so it doesn't fucking count. Plus, both Dark Souls 3 and Demon's Souls have vastly better individual level design than Dark Souls 2, so quite frankly, 2 can suck my actual teenage nuts. Think about Dark Souls 2's world for a minute. Every individual location in the world is practically lined back to back with no connections to outside branches. The only areas in the game that connect to multiple locations are Majula, Drunlake Castle, Shaded Woods, Huntsman's Copse, Hyde's Tower of Flame, and technically Lost Bastille. And personally, I don't even count Lost Bastille because it's not connected to multiple areas through the world design. It's only connected to Forest of Fallen Giants and No Man's Wharf through a cutscene, which does not count in my opinion. It might have been acceptable if you could see the Bastille from either of these locations, kind of like how you can see Anor Londo from Sen's Fortress when you go through that cutscene, but you can't see the Bastille from the forest, or from No Man's Wharf in Dark Souls 2, so it's a superficial connection. And all of the other areas that have multiple connections are just extremely basic. The majority of them just have a one-off area they connect to outside of the main path of progression, and it's always a dead end. Drunlake Castle technically connects to Shrine of Winter, Shrine of Amana, and the Throne of Want, but the Throne of Want is a dead end, so it's not a super interesting connection. Huntsman's Copse connects Harvest Valley and Majula and the Undead Purgatory, but the Purgatory is a dead end, so it's not a super interesting connection. Hyde's Tower of Flame connects Majula and No Man's Wharf and the Blue Cathedral, but the Cathedral is a dead end, so it's not an interesting connection. And all of these examples of dead ends are basically just boss arenas or Covenant locations. They aren't even individual levels to explore like Cathedral of the Deep or Ash Lake or other dead ends in other Souls games. The only complex location in the game that connects to multiple areas that aren't just an immediate dead end outside of Majula, which is the hub, is Shaded Woods, and it's not even that interesting because the 2 branching connections that aren't linked to immediate progression, at least at the start of the game, are just extremely linear paths that connect to a circular room that lead away from everything else in the world. Dark Souls 2 pretends to have an open world, but it doesn't feel like one. It might as well have just done the same thing that Demon's Souls did. Its design feels exactly the same. Now keep in mind, this doesn't have to be a bad thing necessarily, although personally I consider it to be a disappointing downgrade from Dark Souls 1, and I'm still waiting on a true successor all these years later that manages to create a world as impressive as that first one. But if individual level design picks up the slack for the lackluster world design, then I would be willing to overlook said lackluster world design. Thing is, I don't find Dark Souls 2's individual levels to be nearly enjoyable enough to make up for this. For starters, there's a bunch of areas that can essentially be described as a long linear path with enemies blocking your way and nothing else. The road from Majula to the Forked Path Bonfire is a straight path with nothing to explore. Aldia's Keep can essentially be boiled down into a straight path with a few side rooms to explore. Sinner's Rise is the same, basically an elevator that takes you to a long straight path with a few tiny cells to investigate. The path from the Forked Bonfire to the Shrine of Winter is a straight path with nothing to explore. So is the path from Shrine of Winter to Drunlake Castle, and the path from Drunlake Castle to the Throne of Want is also a straight path. Why are there so many straight paths that have nothing to do? And even the more complex areas are still just boring. I mean, okay, this is definitely just me sharing a personal opinion here. I can't speak for anyone else. But so many locations in this game, even when they become more complex, just aren't inviting to explore at all. Earthern Peak is a complex area as far as the level design goes, but I can never be fucked to actually explore it. In fact, every time I get to it, I run through as quickly as I can. I actively despise that area. It's the same with Huntsman's Copse. Lost Bastille is really boring as well. There's plenty of complex pathways to explore in the gutter, but I never want to. I just run through as quick as I can, again, because the enemies are obnoxious and I have to deal with the whole torch mechanic. And Drenlake Castle is probably the most disappointing castle area out of any of the games to explore. Also, the way they designed the ending of that castle makes literally no sense. Why the hell would you make a door like this? Seriously, this design is so stupid. What the fuck am I looking at right now? Again, I'm speaking very personally here. I can't say this is applicable to anyone else. But this is my video on Dark Souls 2, and I did say it was going to be subjective. Honestly, I can't really explain why I dislike these areas so much. I can't tell if it's the enemies, if it's the color palettes, if it's the fact that there just aren't that many interesting things to find. I just find the areas tedious. I don't really have a well-articulated reason. But what I do know is that there's just not that many areas I actually enjoy playing through in the base game. Hyde's Tower of Flame is fun, but I think half of that for me is just because the location itself is beautiful. Undead Crypt I like for some reason. I'm not sure why exactly, but I never dislike playing that area. Iron Keep I enjoy despite the enemy spam. I feel like it's got some of the more interesting level design as far as castle type locations go in Dark Souls 2, and I never dislike playing through Forest of the Fallen Giants. But that's essentially it. Everywhere else in the game ranges from tolerable to terrible, and it really fucking decreases my interest whenever I think about returning to this game for a new playthrough. Now I know what all of you are thinking. It's the thing that I've been conveniently ignoring this whole time, so let's fucking get into it. The DLC. The savior of every Dark Souls 2 fan. This is it, baby. The redemption arc. There's no chance Monty Boy could dislike this part of the game. It's the best fucking part of the game. Right? Honestly, I wish it were as simple as just saying that I love or hate the DLCs in Dark Souls 2, but it really isn't. What I can agree with is that the DLCs are the best parts of the game in terms of what Dark Souls 2 has to offer. The problem is that it also has the worst that the game has to offer. It has some of the best and most interesting level design in Dark Souls 2, but it also has some of the worst level design in Dark Souls 2. It undeniably has the best bosses in the game, but it also has the laziest bosses in the game. It's really hard to put into a box for me because the DLCs are simultaneously the best and worst things about this game. Let's talk about the basics of each DLC. For starters, each one offers 3 bosses, 2 of which are usually considered mandatory and 1 of which is considered optional. The level design is set up similarly. Each DLC is essentially just one long, complex level with one section that acts as an offshoot from the rest. This is the optional area of each DLC, and it houses the optional boss. It's typically looked at by everyone as the quote-unquote challenge section of the DLC because it offers a tough level to traverse, and the boss at the end is typically considered to be quite tough. Something else the DLCs share between each other is the same generic enemy type. Each DLC has a generic enemy that functions as the common thing you're going to be fighting. It's basically just a reskin between each area. The Crown of the Old Iron King has the Ashen Warrior, the Crown of the Sunken King has the Sanctum Soldier, and the Crown of the Ivory King has the Rampart Soldier. All of these guys are humanoids that are slightly larger in stature than the player, who all have really high HP, really high poise, and they all deal a ton of damage. Now, if you take on the DLCs at the end of the game, it's not too big of an issue fighting them, but even still, they feel a little bit overpowered. Also, it's not like there are no unique enemies between the DLCs, there definitely are, but this enemy type is very clearly being reused between all the areas. It's just lazy. It's fucking lazy. It's lazy. But I mean, that's okay. It's not like Dark Souls 2 has a pattern of laziness in its core design philosophy, right, guys? right, right, guys. Am I right? When you're right, you're right. Up fucking top. Give me 5. Give me 5. Yeah. Lazy. Usually the highlight of a Dark Souls DLC section is the bosses, and the DLCs in Dark Souls 2 offer some really good fucking bosses. I'm not gonna deny that. The problem is that they also offer some really fucking lazy bosses. Lazy. Crown of the Old Iron King is easily the best out of the 3 DLCs in my opinion, and offers the fight with the Fume Knight, Sir Alon, and the Blue Smelter Demon. You're going to find a pattern between all the DLCs. Each one has 2 pretty solid fights, and one lazy one.
But I mean, that's okay. It's not like Dark Souls 2 has a pattern of laziness in its core design philosophy, right guys? Right? right guys?
The reason that the Crown of the Old Iron King is the best in my opinion is because the really lazy fight is still pretty good, I think. The Blue Smelter Demon is literally just a copy-paste of the regular Smelter Demon that got thrown into the DLC. The only way they justified its reappearance is it now has various changes made to its moveset. Some moves are sped up, some are delayed, and the 3 phases of the fight are slightly different than the 3 phases from the original fight. Also, it deals magic damage now instead of fire. Honestly, I know this is such a fucking lazy boss, but I really love the Smelter Demon fight, and I kinda can't ignore the boner in my pants that's telling me this is literally just the Smelter Demon fight, except more challenging, and I kinda like that if I'm being honest. I think it's a really good challenge, and it definitely trips you up upon your first few fights with him. I'm not sure what the general consensus is on this fight, if people like it or not on average, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people struggle with the normal Smelter Demon, and this is certainly a slap in the nuts to those players, but again, I straight up think the Smelter Demon is the best fight from the base game, and this is just the best fight but better, basically. Now on to Sir Alon. From what I've seen, most people like Sir Alon the best and believe that he's the best boss in Dark Souls 2. I disagree, but I can respect it. He's definitely a fun fight, he's got an awesome arena to fight in, and his moveset is just really fluid. You gotta love it. Also, his second secret death animation is really cool mechanic that they added, and it's a level of detail that's quite refreshing, if I do say so myself. And I do. Finally, we've got the Fume Knight, and I fucking love the Fume Knight. Favorite boss from Dark Souls 2 easily. It's not even fucking close. I like Sir Alon, but Fume Knight takes the cake easily. I just love everything about him. His 2 phases are both great, his sword is awesome as fuck, and he's just a really solid fight. I rank him up with the best from any Souls game. He's like neck and neck with Artorias for me, and that is some high fucking praise. Moving right along, we can go to the Crown of the Sunken King. Alana the Squalid Bitch is the first mandatory fight, and I kinda like her, but also kinda not. Her gimmick is that she summons help to fight against you, and she's not super aggressive, so it's kinda just a fight where you have to deal with her summon while also watching for her magic. I do have to say though, I believe this is one of the better examples of a gank fight in Dark Souls 2. She can even summon Velstadt, which I know some people might regard as lazy. But honestly, it's one of the better summons she does, I think. As long as you aren't greedy, Velstadt and Alana tend to complement each other's movesets so that you can get hits in on her after baiting Velstadt to swing at you. The only bullshit part about this fight is that if you wait long enough after she summons enemies, she can re-summon a second time, meaning if you get Velstadt and don't finish the boss quickly enough, she can summon skeletons that you need to deal with as well, so you have to watch for her, for Velstadt, and for skeletons. This is a little overkill, I think. I feel like she should not have been able to summon more than one mob at any given time. I understand the logic, because you could have her summon skellies and only kill 2 and leave the final one alive so that she would never summon anything else, but I feel like she could just replenish the skeletons or something instead of adding a new group. It just feels kind of unfair to throw in even more enemies when you're already balancing between 2 bosses in the same arena. Sin is the second mandatory boss, and he's definitely the best dragon fight that Dark Souls 2 has to offer. His toxic fire breath is really cool looking, his moveset's not bad, ultimately he's a pretty dang good fight. He's definitely not better than Midir in my book, but I don't think he's that much worse than Kalameet, and I think Kalameet's a damn good fight. The biggest issue with Sin is if he flies up all the time, because then you're just waiting for him to do some ground attacks so you can actually get some hits in. This can make the fight pretty boring if you can't ever even hit him, but like I said, I do enjoy this fight. Finally, in the Sunken King DLC, is the Grave Robber, Soldier, and Explorer fight. Do you like triple ganks in PvP? You know when you invade someone's world and it's just 3 cunts hanging around waiting to wreck your shit? You like that, right? That's enjoyable. You would consider that fun, correct? I'm sorry, what's that? Incorrect? You hate it? Well, that's too fucking bad, because that is exactly what this boss fight is. It's a triple gank of NPCs. This is the definition of lazy boss design. This is the worst boss fight in Dark Souls 2 as far as I'm concerned. This must have taken FromSoft like 20 minutes to design. I've seen people defend this fight because some insane fucking troglodytes actually enjoy triple gank PvP matches and consider them to be enjoyable, but the game already spams you with so many stupid NPC invasions throughout the game that they really didn't need to incorporate an NPC boss fight as well. And even if you enjoyed this fight, can you really say that this is an interesting and well-designed Dark Souls boss fight? All I can say is,
if you honestly consider that to be the case, you might have brain damage, and I would seek professional help.
Finally, let's look at the Crown of the Ivory King, which, in my opinion, is the worst of the 3 DLCs. Ava is the king's pet and the first mandatory boss of the area, and it's also the only good one as far as I'm concerned. It's got some good delays, it hits hard, I thoroughly enjoyed the challenge, but there's really not that much else to say about it. The second mandatory boss is with the Ivory King himself, and this fight kinda sucks. Like, the fight against the king alone is fine, it's not bad by any means, but it's getting to the king that's the problem. I respect that they were trying to do something new, I can respect the effort at least, but in my opinion, they did not stick the landing. You need to recruit several knights hidden throughout the DLC to help you fight a bunch of the king's knights, and you have to kill like 3 waves of them, I think, before the king himself shows up. This is almost impossible without recruiting at least 2 of the 3 optional knights, because the knights you fight waiting for the king come from these respawning portals and need to be sealed off by the helpers you collected. There's 3 portals and 4 potential knights you can have join you, so 3 have to sacrifice themselves, and you have 1 buddy for the king should he survive. But the thing is that the knights that fight for the king are so fucking overpowered. Their HP and damage is actually insane, and they always seem to aggro me instead of the knights I have helping me, and you have to kill a decent amount of them before the king even shows up. Sometimes when I tried the fight, one of my knights just wouldn't block the portal for some reason, so I had the king spawn in, and another knight spawned with him, so I had to fight both the king and a knight at the same time, because it was only after the knight spawned that my helper decided it was now the right time to seal off the portal. This fight would honestly be really easy if it weren't for this first phase. The king isn't that big of a threat. It's the first part that's so difficult. It feels designed to waste your Estus before you can get to the actual fight. And good fucking luck fighting the king if you don't get the additional knights that fight for you. Finally is the optional boss, which is Ludenzahlen, who are the other king's pets. I hope you enjoyed Ava, because this is literally the exact same fight, except now there's 2 of them. Now to be fair, the second one doesn't join the fight until you get the first one's HP down to like 40-ish%, but then once you kill the first one and get the second one to low HP, it gets a self buff that increases its damage and allows it to regen health for like 2 minutes. Again, this just kinda screams laziness. They basically just took a fight they had already developed and said, now there's 2 of them, and also the second one gets a health regen buff right at the end. It's not as bad as the NPC gank fight, to be fair, but it's basically the same as the Twin Dragon Riders from the base game, just the same thing you've already fought, except now there's 2 of them. Glad to see we're really breaking some new ground here in these DLCs, guys. Now that we've gone through all the bosses, we can finally start talking about the other major aspect of each DLC, that being level design. I'll start with the good stuff. The DLC's mandatory levels are fine. End of the good stuff. Let's talk about the fucking terrible stuff. The optional areas in each DLC are fucking garbage and contenders for the worst areas in any Souls game ever. That is not an exaggeration. These optional challenge levels are the definition of bullshit and laziness combined to make for the perfect horrendous experience. Take the run to the Blue Smelter Demon. It's 3 hallways stuffed to the fucking brim with enemies. Enemies that all hit really hard. Most of them are just the generic knights blocking your way, while above you there will always be one enemy shooting great arrows at you, while another one casts a Tranquil Walk of Peace type spell that doubles your equipment burden. So basically, if you have over 35% equipment burden, you're now fat rolling in a tiny hallway with several enemies who block your path. The most reliable strategy is to just sprint past everything, otherwise the run to the boss would be completely insufferable. The optional level in the Sunken King DLC is the Cave of the Dead, which is just 3 levels of a cave with a bunch of statues that are trying to petrify you. That's it. That's the whole area. And then right before the boss fog, there's like 2 enemies blocking your path. Really great level design. Super interesting. And then finally is the Frigid Outskirts. Oh my god, the Frigid Outskirts. Humor me here. Imagine the worst thing ever, and then multiply that by the length of your cock in picometers. That is about 1/10 of the cringe that is the Frigid Outskirts. It's just a barren wasteland where your visibility is fucked 90% of the time, so you have no clue where to go, and you get bombarded over and over and over again by the reindeer fucks who deal way too much damage, have way too much health, and fight you way too fucking often. This is the worst area in the game. This is the worst area in any Souls game. It's not even a fucking contest. All of these areas are miserable. All of them are fucking awful. They all fucking suck. And before I get anyone who tries to fucking defend them, I need you to stop right where you are, because I've heard the excuse, and it is absolute bullshit. The common defense for these 3 areas is that FromSoft developed them with co-op in mind. This is one of the laziest fucking excuses I think I've ever heard for anything. It's a lazy cop-out. Nobody can actually buy into this, right? It's the dumbest line of logic I've ever heard. Firstly, I have never seen FromSoft say anything along these lines before. I want an official fucking statement from the developers of Dark Souls 2 or the heads of FromSoft where they explicitly say that these areas were designed specifically for co-op, that they're not supposed to be played single player. Secondly, even if FromSoft has come out and said this, it is not an excuse for shit level design. The Frigid Outskirts still sucks my fucking nuts, whether or not it was designed for co-op. And you could use that excuse for anything in the fucking game, anywhere in the game, if you think about it. Does Dark Souls 2 have a problem with enemy spam? Nah, dude, it's just designed for co-op is all. The enemy spam on the way to the Smelter Demon is way too fucking high. I guess the Iron Keep was designed for co-op as well. Is Shrine of Amana way too bloated with casters that bombard you to no end? Perhaps you didn't realize that it was simply designed with co-op in mind. This works as an excuse anywhere in the game where the odds are completely fucked against someone who's just trying to play by themselves. Let me make this perfectly clear. Dark Souls games are PvE experiences first and foremost with tacked on multiplayer options. You should never be forced into summoning for an area in a Souls game. If the only way to make a co-op focused section for the game is to spam the player with difficult enemies and extremely oppressive level design, maybe you shouldn't make co-op focused sections. It is a stupid excuse. Like, at the end of the day, it's still bad level design. I absolutely will not accept this line of logic to brush away these areas as if they're okay because you're just supposed to summon for them. What about the people who have dog shit internet and can't summon? Even if you have great internet, it's not like anyone wants to fucking help in the Frigid Outskirts. What about the people who are in the company of champions and literally aren't allowed to summon? What about the players who just don't like summoning? What are all of these people supposed to do? Just accept that they're not supposed to play this part of the game? I mean, it's possible, obviously. I've done all these areas by myself, as have others, but that doesn't mean that they're well designed or fun to play through. Listen, even if you won't accept my position that these areas are bullshit with or without the summons excuse, you have to admit that they're still awful boss runs regardless. Literally just wasted time on the way to the boss where nothing of actual value is accomplished, and the game just throws an obnoxious challenge at you to overcome. And actually, you know what? This isn't even just an issue with the DLC, because now we can just talk about this. There are several Dark Souls 2 boss runs that are just ridiculous. Take, for example, the boss run to the Executioner's Chariot. The run takes like a minute and 30 seconds just to get to the fog wall, and every time you want to refight this boss, you have to fight through the Valley of Spam, and you have to deal with the Red Invader guy who's waiting right in front of the fog wall. FromSoft could have put a ladder to climb up so you can skip the bullshit valley and just fucking have to traverse the bridge. It's literally right above your bonfire. But did they do this? No, of course not. They let you kick down a tree instead.
That's a really great shortcut, FromSoft. I'm really glad I have that, considering I already reached the fucking bonfire. You actual... can't use that word. Idiots.
How about another shit boss run? Dark Lurker, one of the hardest fights in the game, and debatably the hardest in the base version, requires you to go through 3 loading screens to reattempt it, assuming you die to it. 1 for your death, 1 to just load into the Covenant level, and then finally a last one to teleport you to the boss arena. Why do I have to sit through this shit every fucking time I want to fight him? Not to mention, it takes like a minute and a half just to clear out the enemies in the level because the Covenant requires you to clear the stage of enemies in order to move on to the boss fight. The Ancient Dragon boss run took me almost 2.5 minutes to get past all the fights just to get to the dragon, who can kill most players in a single hit. Hope you don't get hit by his fire, or it's back to the start for you, and you're required to fight the enemies along the way unless you want to get ganked into the fucking ground by the 15 dudes who watch you. The run to the Throne Watcher and Defender, Nashandra, and Aldia all take a minute and 10 seconds, and half of that fucking time is just waiting for the stupid fucking door to open. Why do I need to open these more than once? Like, once I've opened them, they really can't stay open for my convenience. In Dark Souls 1, when you got rid of the golden fog wall, you don't have to watch a cutscene of it disappearing each time you die and want to get past it again. It just fucking leaves, and doesn't waste your time. Freya takes a minute and 20 seconds, fucking Smelter Demon takes a minute and 40 seconds, and we haven't even reached the worst of the worst, which lie, of course, in the DLC. The Old Iron King has the run to Sur-Lon, which takes a minute and 50 seconds. You're basically required to clean out the first floor of enemies, or they will absolutely destroy you as you try to drop into the hole to get to the second part of the level. I found that the second hallway can consistently be run through without having to fight the enemies, but good luck trying to do it on the first hallway. And Sur-Lon is chump change compared to the 2 worst examples, which both reside in the Ivory King DLC, further cementing its place as the worst DLC in the game. The Ivory King himself took me 2 minutes and 45 seconds before he showed up. Yes, the run to the boss fog is considerably shorter than this, but the initial waves of knights are not part of the boss fight. They don't have a boss health bar, they do not count. They might as well just be the exact same as any other run where the game throws a fuck ton of enemies at you right before you're allowed to interact with the fog wall, because that's essentially what's happening each time you reattempt him. The second fight, which is Luddenszalen, took me 3 entire minutes of just sprinting through a frozen, shitty wasteland, and there is literally no defending this one. It's just 3 minutes of sprinting. It's like Dark Souls 2 became a shitty mobile game. If you can't beat the challenge, you have to wait 3 minutes to try again. It's actually awful. And considering this is one of the hardest locations in the game, let alone one of the hardest bosses that the game has to offer, you can bet that you'll be making that 3-minute trek multiple times. Dying to the reindeers, dying to the boss, dying in real life. Did you know that if you die in the game, you'll die in real life? Nah, that's not true, but you'll probably wish it was after wandering through the frigid outskirts for the 20th fucking time. This was the only area of the game I was considering not playing through for this video, and I can guarantee you I will never attempt this area in the future. It's just not worth it. Something to keep in mind as well is that we've only been focusing purely on the length of some of these boss runs. There are others that are certainly shorter, but the bullshit comes from the amount of crap that stands between you and the boss that just makes the run to said boss miserable. A perfect example is Iron Passage. It's only a 45-second run if you know how to avoid everything, but there's 14 enemies trying to kill you along the way. 14 enemies stuffed into 3 narrow hallways. Some have range, some slow you down, some are very large, all of them are trying to murder you. Iron Keep we already established to have like 15 enemies you have to kill along the way to attempt the regular Smelter Demon. The Memory of the Old Iron King also throws 12 enemies in the player's path before they can attempt the fight with Sir Alon, and that's ignoring all the fire lizards that are scattered around the level as well. Both Vendrick and Velstat's run has 2 knights and a dragon rider just thrown right in front of the fog wall just in an attempt to screw the player over from rushing to the boss encounter. I could offer more areas, honestly, with just as much enemy spam thrown into a boss run just to make it more tedious, or I suppose as Dark Souls 2 would call it, more challenging. But I think I've made my point, and there's really no reason to keep beating a dead horse. Now, just as a side note, I do recognize that this isn't just an issue with Dark Souls 2. All the Souls games have some boss runs that could be shorter or throw a few less enemies at the player along the way, but one, just because those other games suffer from this doesn't mean I can't criticize Dark Souls 2 for it, and 2, none of those other games have boss runs that come close to the worst that Dark Souls 2 offers, not in terms of length or spam. The absolute worst example in the first game was the minute and 45-second run to Seath, and the majority of runs were about a minute or less, and out of every single boss run I tested on Dark Souls 3, all of them were under a minute. Neither of these games had instances of excessively spammed enemies along the route to a boss either, except for, again, the run to Seath. I'm not going to reference Demon Souls here. I don't have my copy at college right now, and I know for a fact that Demon Souls also has some very lengthy boss runs, but I can safely say that as far as the spam aspect goes for boss runs, Demon Souls doesn't suffer from that, to my knowledge. I might be forgetting something though, so I guess point me out if I'm wrong on that. I guess we might as well shift focus from bosses. We've only been talking about them for like 10 fucking years at this point. So let's tackle something else. How about the Covenants? I'll be honest, it's not the biggest concern for me, but that's mostly because I don't really use Covenants when playing Souls games, aside from maybe the Sunlight Bros to co-op. But there are some stupid fucking Covenant requirements in this game, and we gotta talk about at least a few of them. Now don't get me wrong, not every Covenant sucks completely. I only really hate 2 of them. And then there's also one that just annoys me because it's overly complicated, so let's start with that one. The Pilgrims of Dark Covenant is only joined after talking to Dark Diver Grandal in 3 hidden locations throughout the world. You have to find his location, exhaust his dialogue, and when you meet him at the 3rd hidden location, you'll finally be allowed to enter the Covenant. The problem with this is that you now have to travel back to all of those other locations you found him in order to play out those specific Covenant challenges in order to increase your rank. Why do you have to do this? It's stupid. Just let the player join the Covenant from the start and allow them to take on the levels while they're actually playing through that area to begin with. As it stands, 2 of the 3 locations you find him in are pretty out of the player's way because he's hidden within the level, so you have to find him at all 3 locations and then warp back to all 3 of those locations a second time to actually do the Covenant challenges. It's just a waste of the player's time. I don't understand why this wasn't streamlined at all. Not to mention, in order to attempt the areas to increase your Covenant rank, you have to give Grandal an effigy each time you want to replay an area. The grand ending of this Covenant is the Dark Lurker fight, and you have to give up an effigy every time you want to attempt him. Keep in mind again, this is debatably the hardest boss in the base game of Dark Souls 2. That's just stupid. This isn't even mentioning the fact that even after clearing all 3 levels and unlocking the Dark Lurker fight, you can't just retry him. You have to fight through one of the Covenant levels first, which means killing all of the enemies in each level to clear the fog wall before the boss fight so you can finally try the boss again. I don't understand why I can't just warp straight to Dark Lurker considering you have to go through a loading screen to warp into his arena even after beating the level. I've already proven I can beat the level. I had to beat all 3 of them specifically just to unlock this stupid fight. So why do I have to keep beating them if they aren't even physically connected to the boss arena? This entire Covenant is like a really cool idea, but it needed to be executed better because as it stands, it just wastes a bunch of the player's time because you have to follow some convoluted list of objectives in order to join and increase your rank. Moving right along, we have the 2 worst Covenants in the game without a doubt, which is the Blue Sentinels and the Brotherhood of Blood. These are essentially the Dark Wraiths and the Blade of Dark Moon from Dark Souls 1. For starters, neither of these covenants offer red eye orbs or blue eye orbs, only cracked variations. Fucking why? Isn't the entire point of covenants like these to invade people out in the world? Isn't that the most enjoyable part about PvP covenants, screwing over players as they're trying to complete a level? I mean, sure, you can still do this with the cracked orbs, but why can't there be a reward that allows me to invade indefinitely? Every single other Souls game has a reusable invasion tool. And yes, I know for the Brotherhood of Blood you have the red eye sign too, but that's obviously not the same. Invading a willing participant is not the same as invading a randomly chosen person. And the blue cunts have the ring that randomly invades or whatever, but I don't want to waste a ring slot either, right? Right? That's not just me. Just give me the orb. Just give me a fucking orb, Dark Souls 2. An orb. I want an orb. So clearly the focus for these covenants wasn't put on invading in the overworld. But that's okay, because Dark Souls 2 offers a PvP arena that is specifically focused for both of these covenants. The arena will match you with one other person in the covenant, and you duel to the death. Whoever wins gets a +1 towards their total devotion rating, and you need to accumulate enough of these wins or points in order to rank up in the covenant. If you're in the blue covenant, apparently there's no penalty for losing a duel, but being in the Brotherhood of Blood actually subtracts a devotion point if they lose the match. Also, though, the Brotherhood of Blood covenant doesn't require you to do anything in order to do one of these matches, but I think the blue covenant requires you to use a token of fidelity in order to invade in the arena, so these are very interesting discrepancies between these two covenants. I don't know why they did that, but they did. So then, aside from not really supporting invasions in the overworld, what's the big deal? Well, the massive horse-cocked size fucking deal is the fact that you need 500 devotion points in order to fully rank these covenants up. 500. You need to win 500 times in order to fully rank these covenants. And if you're in the Brotherhood of Blood, it could be God knows how many fucking invasions you have to win, because each time you lose, you go down a point towards that 500 goal. As far as I'm aware, you could literally win 499 arena matches in a row, and then lose 499 arena matches right afterwards, and you'd literally be starting over completely. And the rewards locked behind both of these fully ranked covenants are spells. You need to be fully ranked in the Brotherhood of Blood to get the spell Great Chaos Fireball. You need to be fully ranked in the Blue Sentinels if you want the spell Bountiful Sunlight. The only other way to get these spells is to complete the game twice and buy them from the cunt in Drenlake Castle. And no, you can't Bonfire Ascetikim in order to cheese it on a first playthrough. You're actually required to fully fuck this game twice if you want those spells. None of the other covenants are this ridiculous. There is not a single other covenant that requires more than 50 tokens of some kind in order to fully rank out said covenant. Most of them are like 30 in order to fully rank. But these two, I hope you're a fucking PvP god. Either that or have fun playing through the game 2.5 times just to get your character that cool spell you wanted. It is fucking stupid, plain and simple. These requirements for these two covenants are absolutely broken and completely unfair to the player. This isn't even mentioning how broken invasions are to begin with. I mean, for starters, you have soul memory, one of the dumbest inclusions they could have possibly made in this game. Basically, your soul memory is the total number of souls you collect throughout your playthrough. Doesn't matter if they got spent on souls, on consumables, on upgrades, even if you lose the souls by dying. Your soul memory is only concerned with the total number of souls you've ever collected. It was designed to help players match with people around their own level, as well as to stop twinks from ruining everyone's experience, but they failed on both accounts. For starters, twinks are even worse in this game because based on soul memory calculations, it's entirely possible to get a +10 weapon and still invade in the earliest soul bracket. There are YouTube videos on how to do this. And secondly, for anyone who enjoys invading regularly or co-oping regularly, your soul memory is constantly going to be going up every time you successfully invade or help someone kill a boss. This means you have a limited number of times you can help co-op with specific bosses before your soul memory becomes too large for most people to find your summon sign. It's the same with PvP. If you keep doing it and winning, eventually you're going to be up against people that are just far more over-leveled than you are, unless if you were also over-leveling from the souls. There are ways around this, namely if you invade in the arena or use a ring that prevents you from gaining souls, but this just overcomplicates things for everyone. Not to mention, soul memory isn't even always calculated when invading in an arena like for the Brotherhood of Blood. The game will prioritize other players who are in a similar soul memory bracket, but if none are available, you'll just get paired with whoever is currently on. So you might be level 50 trying to have some fun early game with arena invasions, and then you get some level 300 plus Havel tank who's maxed out soul memory who destroys you every single time. Everything about how this system works is just confusing, overly complicated, and designed in a way that is not even remotely player-friendly. I can appreciate the fact that they tried to make invasions and PvP and everything more fair, but they screwed up everything in the process. They should have just kept it based on what your level is and whether or not people are close to your level. It's just stupid. Hey, not to do a 180, but have you guys ever noticed how the enemy's AI can be completely fucked in this game? I mean, there have been a few times where an enemy will just act completely brain dead, and I have no idea why. Sometimes it's them moving around with no logic because they can't decide what to do based on a specific encounter with them. Sometimes they'll completely ignore the player. Sometimes they'll stop targeting you randomly and just fucking shoot into the sky for literally no reason. Sometimes they'll just fucking off themselves. It's all just fucked. Not to mention, these Falconer people. These nuts. What the actual fuck is up with their movement animation? Sometimes it's normal, sometimes their waist is twisted 90 degrees, sometimes they're fucking... it just makes no sense. It just screams unpolished. I'm finished. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Look, gamers and gamettes. No women watch this fucking YouTube channel. The thing is that Dark Souls 2 is like the best, worst thing I've ever played. At its core, it's still Souls. And I love Souls. And I wouldn't fucking talk about something for this long, this harshly, if I didn't feel some actual reason to. Dark Souls 2 is just this thing that I want to love, but it makes it really hard. It's not that I can't enjoy Dark Souls 2 at all. It's not that I literally despise the game or anything. I just want to see it be better. I love the Souls series. Literally fucking love. I have played so much goddamn Dark Souls that it's literally part of who I am at this point. Like, honestly, I don't know what my life would be like without these games. They were a massive part of my high school experience. They're still a part of my college experience, and I'm hoping that even after I become a loser adult, there'll be some part of that experience too. I criticize Dark Souls 2 because I know it could be better. I don't know too much about the development period, but from what I've heard, it was like completely changed around the halfway point, and the original direction Dark Souls 2 was going to be going in was like terrible up until Yui Tanimura took the reins on the project. I don't really know that much about it, but according to some people, it's a miracle that Dark Souls 2 is as good as it is in its current state, because it could have been a whole lot worse. There's obviously a lot of stuff I didn't cover that much because I'm either not that familiar with it or I don't really care that badly about it. I didn't touch the story at all, as promised, because honestly, I can't be fucked to care that much about any of the Souls stories. I'm dog shit at PvP, as you've probably already seen, and I don't feel like I'm the person who should be talking about that kind of stuff. Plus, the consensus is that the PvP in this game is like the best compared to all the games, so I don't know that I'd even have that much to say on it anyways. What else did I fucking miss? The NPCs, as if those fuckers even matter.
What? Emerald who? Yeah. Yeah, alright, changed my mind. 10 out of 10 IGN. Get the fuck out of here already.